All right, so it's 101. We're going to get started. Thank you, everyone who's going to tune in today. This is the Canada Science and Tech Museum's second Google Hangout we're doing for the Canadian Energy Literacy Network. This webinar is part of a series that happens the last Thursday of every month, and it's an opportunity for people in the energy and education fields to gather together and discuss topics that are of interest to all of us. The Let's Talk Energy program, which is hosting this, sees these discussions is a great opportunity to work with different groups and individuals who are interested in energy. We really think that by working together, we can maximize our investments and hopefully create a network where we can share resources, learn from each other, and have some provocative discussions and some new ideas. I also just wanted to mention quickly that it is our Talk Energy Week. So we have activities all across the country, and we're encouraging people to reflect on their use of energy and the value that that brings, as well as some of the trade-offs. As part of it, one of our staff is actually walking from Montreal to Ottawa in the cold and camping out along the way. So he's finding out what it's like to live in Eastern Ontario without energy. And let me tell you, he's going to be pretty excited to get home tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking with Jason Donev, who is a tenured professor at the University of Calgary and has received awards for teaching and outreach on the subject of energy. Dr. Donev teaches nuclear power, the senior project class for energy. Of course, it introduces issues related to energy to a non-technical audience, affectionately called Energy for Everyone. Dr. Donev regularly talks with advocates and interested parties all over the political spectrum about various energy issues, especially but not limited to nuclear power and climate change. Dr. Donev is also the founder and chief editor of Energyeducation.ca. His talk today will discuss why energy is important to our way of life and why people should care. He's going to explore the world, where the world gets its energy from on a global sense as well as a country-by-country basis, and he'll be talking about how that is changing. So with any further ado, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Donev.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone. I am also Jason here at the University of Calgary, and I'm going to switch over to a screen share so you can see my slides.
But Jason, before you do go any further, I just wanted to mention to the audience, if you have any questions, mouse over the top of your screen, and you will see a little speech bubble with Q&A in it. Just click on that, and it'll open up the chat function where you can post your questions. Sorry for interrupting there.
Thank you. So, powering the future. Starting here from Calgary, Alberta. So I'm Dr. Donev, and I represent the Energyeducation.ca team, who's listed here. And you can find us on Twitter at NRG_EDU. And let's get started. So what I'm going to talk about, who's using how much energy? And then I want to talk about how and why that's actually getting bigger. And then we're going to talk about the biggest problem with that. So I'm going to divide the world into two broadly different countries that have very different economies, often have very different politics, and just very different situations. And those are the OECD countries, shown here in blue, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and then the red countries are sort of everybody else. And then you have the darkish red countries are the countries that cooperate closely with the OECD. So broadly speaking, we have the OECD countries in blue, who are the wealthy countries, Western Europe, North America, Australia, Chile, Japan, and then we have sort of the rest of the world. Now, if we look at the total energy use of all of the OECD countries together, that's shown in blue, and all of the non-OECD countries, that's shown in red. And you can see that the energy use in the non-OECD countries is growing faster than the energy use in the OECD countries, shown in blue. Now, if we switch this over to total electricity use as opposed to total energy use, we see that electricity use is growing even faster than energy use in general. So, when we specifically zoom in on the non-OECD countries in red, it is growing by leaps and bounds. Okay? We'll talk about why that is. It's also important to know that the number of people in each of these countries is very, very different. The, the blue line represents the population of the OECD countries, which is a little over 1 billion people and is growing very slowly, while the red line shows that the non-OECD countries have close to 6 billion people, roughly 5 times as many people as exist in the wealthy world. So that means that these previous slides showing total energy use and total electricity use are really not telling the whole story, because the population distribution is really not even. If we divide it out and have the per capita energy use, what we see along the top is that the blue line shows the energy use per person in the wealthy countries, the blue countries, the OECD countries, the first world countries, the developed economies, if you will. And the rapid growth that we see per person is now this little tiny growth here, which winds up still being very significant, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Switching over to electricity use, we wind up once again seeing that the wealthy countries, the blue countries, the OECD countries, the first world countries, are using an awful lot more electricity per person. In fact, in much of the developing world, there's close to 1 billion people who have access to no electricity whatsoever. They do still use energy, but they don't actually have an electricity infrastructure. So I think we need to reframe the conversation. We don't actually want calories, gasoline, electricity, or natural gas. In fact, quite surprisingly, people don't care about energy at all unless they're making money off of it. What we want is food, travel, computer games, our iPods, warm houses, cooked meals, warm showers. We want energy services. We want the services that energy provides. Now, this idea was first introduced to me in a book called Smelling Land by David Sandblum Scott. So let's say we want a service, like sending an email. Sorry, that's actually the energy service. What we actually want is the service of talking with grandma. So this little girl wants to talk with her grandmother, and she could email her grandmother, she could phone her grandmother, or she could go and visit grandmother. These are all things that she can do to get some sort of want met. And these are met through an energy service. Okay? Now, the service technology, you have computers to send emails, you could drive, you could fly, you could take a train to go see your grandma. All of those are ways of accomplishing this end goal. And we have these service technologies which are in turn using what's called an energy currency. Computers need electricity, cars need gasoline, but neither electricity nor gasoline are fundamental sources of energy found in nature. Energy currencies allow technology to easily use energy. It also allows the energy that's produced from the energy sector to be spread throughout the entire wealthy world. One of the biggest differences between the OECD countries and those non-OECD countries is how extensive is the harvest technologies and the distribution technologies. So harvest technologies generate these energy currencies. For example, wind turbines spin and make electricity. Oil derricks and refineries make gasoline. So that gasoline is going into the car to go and visit grandma. Or the wind turbine spins, makes electricity to power your cell phone to call grandma, or powers your laptop to email grandma. But these harvest technologies aren't existing in a vacuum either. The harvest technologies are actually exploiting natural resources. What do I mean by that? Well, wind turbines are getting their energy from some flow, a flow of air, which is wind. Oil derricks are getting energy from a fundamental primary fuel, like an oil deposit. So that oil deposit gets sucked out by the oil derrick, which is then turned into gasoline, which is then put into cars, which is the service technology, to visit grandmother. But all of that ultimately winds up coming from the sun. The sun creates different wind pattern, the sun powers flora and fauna that die, get buried, and eventually become oil. And this artwork was created by Shining Chen and is used with permission. It all does eventually come from the sun, except geothermal and nuclear energies. Okay, so that's how the energy comes forward. Now, what exactly is this? Now, if you bend your wrist, just stick your arm out and bend your wrist up and down, that's 1 watt of power. Power is energy use per time. Now, if you do deep knee bends, just stand up out of your chair, sit back down, stand up out of your chair, sit back down. That's 100 watts. That is the average power input for a person on a 2,000 calorie a day diet averaged over the course of a day. This idea was originally proposed, as far as I can tell, by Buckminster Fuller, and he referred to it as an energy servant. But because it's energy per unit time, I prefer to call it a power servant. Now, these servants give us trips to the store, goods in a store, and the power to run the goods from the store. I like the 100 watt unit because it's human sized. It gives us some idea of how much power we're using. So if we can quantify our total power use in terms of some number of power servants, then we're in a situation where we can actually say something meaningful about our overall power usage and quantify it compared to that colleague of Jason's who's walking from Ottawa to Montreal in the winter. Heavens to Murgatroyd, that sounds painful. Okay, so humans are power rich. Humans are the only species that has access to channeling this power from fuels and flows within nature, within these natural resources. Okay? So on average, humans use 20 times the power produced by the human body. So we would say in this parlance that people, every individual in the world, on average, uses 20 power servants. Of course, that's not easily quantified from the standpoint of we know that there exists wealthy countries and poor countries, haves and have-nots, if you will. So in the non-OECD countries, people use 14 power servants on average. So all of the red countries averaged together, that winds up meaning we have 14 power servants. Now I'm going to switch this up for a second. And if you've opened up your Q&A, please guess how many energy servants, on average, the OECD countries use. So just type that into your Q&A panel. Just make a bit of a guess. You too, Jason. Okay. So let's see. I'm seeing one guess. Okay, the one guess is 100. I don't know why I'm not seeing any other guesses. I guess I should have tried this before we started as well. Go back to the screen share. No, full screen. Okay. It is roughly 50 power servants averaged over all of OECD. Okay? So roughly 5 times as much. However, Canada uses roughly 110. So even between the OECD countries and the non-OECD countries, there's a huge difference. But within OECD, Canada is quite a bit richer than the average OECD country. So, if we want to get everybody on the planet up to the same level of wealth as Canada, at the moment, in 2014, which is the most recent data I have, the Earth uses 16 terawatts in total. So in the future, we would need 5 times today's power at 80 terawatts. Okay? So power is needed to live the way we want to. On the left here, we have a furnace, which is an awful lot like the furnace that I have in my basement for some reason. And right next to it, we have a water heater, which is surprisingly similar to the water heater that exists in my basement here in Calgary. And on the right here, we have a little girl, I assume she's somewhere between the age of 10 and 12, warming herself with biomass. So when people talk about biomass, that's what biomass looks like. She's burning animal dung to keep warm in the capital city of Nepal, in Kathmandu, where the average January temperature is around 1 Celsius. That's about 34 Fahrenheit for the 2 Americans that are watching. Energy-dense fuels give us a high quality of life. We talked last month about the need for fact-based conversations, and I must say I am actually very opposed to fact-based conversations. I think fact-based conversations are exactly how we got into the problems that we have right now, and I think that statements like energy-dense fuels give a high quality of life is a wonderful example of a fact-based conversation. But when you actually look at pictures that start talking about these are real people, and these real people are either cooking on something that looks an awful lot like the stove in my kitchen, or here we have a traditional cook stove. Once again, this is biomass. This is how a significant fraction of the world actually cooks their food using charcoal, and that's the best technology available for that woman cooking that meal. On the left, we have a kerosene lamp. That kerosene lamp is lighting someone who is attempting to sew. He's operating a sewing machine. And on the right, we see a light-emitting diode hooked up to a solar panel. So the non-OECD world wants the energy wealth that the rest of the world has. Okay? So where does the world get its power now? How is that changing? There was a question, can we get a PDF of the slides after the presentation? Absolutely. Where does the world get power now, and how is that changing? Well, once again, I'm going to ask a question in the Q&A. I want everybody to say, what is the fastest growing primary energy? What is the fastest growing primary energy? Natural gas, wind, solar, coal, nuclear, hydro, geothermal, tidal. Just go ahead and I'm hoping that people will type in an answer. I'm not seeing anything.
Jason, I'm just going to say, give it a second. There's a bit of a lag, so if you wait 60 seconds, you might get them coming in.
Okay. I see one answer so far. And it's from somebody I know, too. So, hi, Gordon. Okay. The only answer we've been given is coal, and coal is the correct answer. I want to show you what that actually looks like. So here we have coal is the correct answer. Here we have a graph on the Energy Education website, and here we have coal use back in 1965, and I've highlighted some countries of interest. Here's Brazil, here's Canada, here's China, here's India, and here's the United States. We're going to press play, and this is going to show, this is the USSR, which is going to break up. We're going to see how coal use has been, that was the breakup of the USSR, has been changing with time. And let's keep watching China. Keep watching China. Keep watching China. So it's important to recognize that when we say coal is the fastest growing source of energy, and of course coal is giving off an awful lot of carbon dioxide, we're talking about wind and solar. But from the perspective of what's actually getting used, it's fossil fuels. Okay? Now, what does that actually mean? So my next question for you is, now that we've had a chance to see where the non-OECD world is getting its energy, we clearly see there's a lot of poor people in the world. In the last 30 years, what has happened to energy poverty? Has it gone up by a factor of 2, down by a factor of 2, or stayed roughly the same? So we'll just say, what's happened to the number of people living below €1 a day? Your options are A, goes up by a factor of 2, B, goes down by a factor of 2, and C, oh, sorry, B stays the same and C goes down by a factor of 2. So A doubles, B stays the same, C drops by a factor of 2. And of course, I have another cool graph to show off this answer. All right. There is a lag. All right. So I'll assume that people have submitted their answer. So here we have poverty in different in different regions. So here we have the total number of people, almost 2 billion people living below the equivalent of €1 a day in 1981. And you can see a significant fraction of them are actually here in Asia, and very few of them live in Europe and Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and North Africa. So we're going to press play, and we're going to watch what happens to the poverty rate. Keep watching. And down it goes. So we are seeing that there are roughly half as many people living below €1 a day now as there were 30 years ago. And I claim that the reason for that is actually the huge growth of coal, specifically in China and India. Okay? So, to go back to the slides, energy use is increasing, and what we're using to do that is coal, and there's a problem with that. So Alberta uses coal, a lot of coal, where I live here, and the coal, if it were put on a coal train in 1 year, would be 2,880 kilometers long, roughly 2,000 miles for the Americans in the audience, which would stretch from Calgary here in Alberta to Sudbury, and if you'd like something in the US, that would be roughly from Los Angeles to Chicago. Okay? If you look at the world's coal use, it would wrap around the planet 40 times. But just for Alberta, in just 1 year, we would have that much coal. Okay? Now, if you want to avoid CO2 use, what you could do is you could start up a solar panel. Does that account for inflation? Yes, it did. That is a purchase price parity comparison. So it accounts not only for inflation, but it also accounted for how much the money is worth in different countries. So it's a complicated thing that I don't understand, but there you have it. Okay, so if we want to avoid CO2, people are saying, let's just put up solar panels. Let's do wind. So here's the city of Calgary, a city of 1 million people, that takes roughly 40 minutes to drive across this way and roughly an hour or so to drive across this way. By way of comparison, that is the solar panel necessary for my province. Okay? So here's a solar panel. It is roughly the same size as Calgary. It would take quite a while to drive across, either vertically or horizontally. However, if we want to go to wind turbines, the wind farms to power Alberta, setting entirely aside the issue of the fact that we can't build wind farms that much, nor can we store the electricity from the wind farms because the wind doesn't always blow, but the landscape that we would need to take up is enormous. By way of comparison, those little tiny black dots are the amount of footprint that we would need for nuclear. It is also the footprint that we would need for coal. So one of the reasons we keep using coal is it's cheap. Another reason is that it doesn't take up a lot of land. By way of comparison, we have this much coal stretching much of the way across Canada or the US, and we would have 4 truckloads of uranium in order to power all of that. Okay? One of the reasons I'm so in favor of nuclear power is that nuclear power has by far the safest and easiest to deal with waste because it doesn't actually pollute the environment at all, unlike, say, coal. Now, why am I so down on coal? Coal has done wonderful things for the world. Coal is still getting people out of poverty. However, this much carbon dioxide creates dangerous changes to climate. This will destroy our way of life. This will have massive, massive impacts on the environment, and it will, in fact, hurt people's economies, people's job, and people's way of life. Now, there have been 14,000 peer-reviewed climate articles published in the 20-year span between 1991 and 2002. Up against that, we have 24 rejecting global warming. You can find all 24 papers that reject global warming here. My favorite is the one that pretends the Earth isn't spinning to make the math easy. There is no scientific debate about climate change. It's real, it's a problem, it's us. It hasn't really gotten bad yet, but it will. We, the scientific community, are more confident about climate change than we are about gravity. Just wrap your mind around that for a second. We don't know how gravity, Jen, I see your question, I'll come back to it. We don't actually know how gravity works, but we do know how climate change works. Okay? So what does that look like? Well, over the course of the past few decades, the world is getting warmer. The world will continue to get much, much warmer because climate change hasn't really started yet. What we've done is we've primed the pump for an unprecedented in human history change to human climate. So we, the energy literacy community, are faced with a very, very difficult question. We want people to be as energy wealthy as we are here in Canada. We want the economic opportunities. We want the educational opportunities. I mean, just think about what it'd be like trying to do your homework in this light. We want that for everyone in the world. At the same time, the way we are going about doing that is we are balanced against stopping unprecedented climate change that could end the existence of a significant fraction of the species on planet Earth. This is a difficult, difficult problem that is going to take everybody working together from all different disciplines. I want to take a second to say we are Energyeducation.ca. We run an Energy 101 class, which is a 3-hour class that actually teaches people the fundamentals of the entire energy sector. This includes Ellen Lloyd, Braden Heffernan, Jacqueline Williams, James Jendon, Jasdeep Tour, Jordan Hanania, Kaylin Stenhouse, Gokul Duran, Shining Chen, Isaac Falber, Allison Campbell, and Yanying Carpenter. We have both students working on this and volunteers. I am very grateful to all of these people who make me look good. Thanks to them for putting all of this stuff together. I also had a number of students here at the University of Calgary who contributed their senior thesis projects to Energyeducation.ca. We currently have 300 pages. We're hoping to grow to over 1,000. And I want to thank the University of Calgary School of Public Policy for funding to continue this project. I also thank you for your time and attention, and I will now attempt to answer the questions that I hope will come in momentarily. Okay, let me stop the slide. Show there. Okay, Jenna, I don't know how to say your last name. Schoolhoff, perhaps? I was under the impression that nuclear waste does harm the environment. That is certainly the impression that an awful lot of people are under. Give me just a moment. Here we have a can-do fuel bundle. This is all of the, well, it's empty, right, because it'd be very heavy otherwise. But this is all of the uranium that a family of 4 in Canada would need for 100 years, okay? So this is a very, very, very small amount of fuel, and it's a very, very, very small amount of waste. Keep in mind that in Alberta, for example, the total amount of coal is a 2,800 kilometer long train that when we burn it, it actually triples in weight. So coal is wonderful, but what do you do with the waste? You breathe it in. With nuclear, we actually know where every single bundle has that has ever been used is sitting right now. Okay? Every single nuclear fuel bundle in the world is a known quantity. We know where that is because it's under control. So it is very hazardous. If it got into the environment, it would hurt the environment. But the thing is, it doesn't get into the environment, so it doesn't hurt the environment. There's an important distinction between pollution, which is stuff that we wind up creating, we as humans wind up creating to get out into the environment that harms it, and waste, which is something that we have created from a process that can't be used. Not all waste is harmful. It depends on how it's actually used. Energy storage is a major... Jenna, I don't know how to ask you if I've actually addressed your question, but that's the best answer I have. Put something back in the queue if you'd like more. Kathy, I don't know how to say your last name either, asks, energy storage is a major innovation touch point right now. Do you feel that this could change the potential use of solar and wind, i.e. being able to store energy produced when the wind is not blowing. So a little context for Kathy's question, but I hope Kathy doesn't mind me putting down. We need to use electricity within a millisecond of when it is created. So if we generate electricity, we need to use it that fast. Like the time it takes for me to snap my fingers, we need to use it that fast. So it's not just a matter of the wind blowing at inconvenient times. If the wind actually blows too much and we create too much electricity, we can't do anything about that. So energy storage is a major innovation touch point. I'm not quite sure what you mean by touch point, but I'm going to assume that what you mean is that a lot of people are working on energy storage, and that's absolutely a true statement. What I can tell you is that battery technology is very mature technology, which means it's very unlikely that battery technology will see a dramatic improvement in the coming decades. We're going to see incremental improvements, and we're going to see things going up a little tiny bit at a time. All of the batteries in the world would not provide all of the electricity in the world for more than a minute. So at a fundamental level, I believe that while we do need to definitely pursue energy storage, I don't really see it coming forward in a way that's going to make enough of a difference, unless you start including things like fuel cells. Now, fuel cells are a really interesting beast, which can be considered energy storage. They use hydrogen, and in using hydrogen, they are not in fact using a primary energy source, but using an energy currency like electricity and gasoline. So hydrogen has to be created. So that's why I consider hydrogen and fuel cells to be an energy storage thing, if you will. So from that standpoint, I see hydrogen fuel cells as being very handy for transportation, and whether I've attended some interesting debates about whether it'll ever work for aircraft, but it's definitely something that could eventually be used in cars. At the moment, I really look at wind power as being something that should be used alongside hydro and, unfortunately, natural gas and coal. There is no silver bullet. I love nuclear, but nuclear cannot do everything. It cannot do it all. There are definitely downsides of nuclear. There is no question that there are downsides of nuclear, and there are downsides of coal, but we still need it. You take a country like Mongolia. Let me switch. No, I don't have time to do that. Sorry. Okay. I've waxed poetic quite a bit about Kathy's question. Kathy, I'm sorry if you have further to ask or respond, then please put something else in the queue. Okay, the next one in front of me is from Alex Johnstone. Alex says, Jason, do you want to address the energy remaining in an irradiated used CANDO fuel bundle? Happy to. So what Alex is referring to is that this is a CANDO fuel bundle. This would go into a Canadian nuclear reactor, and in going into a Canadian nuclear reactor, it would stay there for roughly 18 months and then would come out again, and it would be hot, both from the kitchen stove sense in that it's hot to the touch, and it is also hot from the radioactive sense in that this is definitely radioactive enough to cause problems. However, what Alex is referring to is the 100 years worth of electricity that's sitting in here, because you could say it's in the CANDO reactor for 18 months and it's powering 100 homes as opposed to this bundle actually powering my home for 100 years, right? Just move the math around. But there's actually still quite a bit of energy available in this. Nuclear energy is so much more energy dense, and I encourage you to look at our energy density page on Energyeducation.ca, because my students did a great job of writing that page. And if we were to actually take this and put it into a different type of nuclear reactor, we could actually get somewhere between 50 and 80 times as much energy out of this. So there's a lot more energy in this than even the 100 years that I talked about. And what Alex didn't ask about is that when we talk about this, people generally think nuclear waste is this green glowing goo. It's actually a solid. It's a solid that we keep underwater, and the water then shields all of the radiation, and then we eventually will bury it underground. there's a lot of other stuff in here that's really valuable as well. In Canada's nuclear waste, and I use the term waste perhaps ill-advisedly, Canada's irradiated fuel bundles, there are a lot of very valuable materials, including gold, platinum, silver. As a matter of fact, if, once again getting into the science fiction, if we were able to extract everything from the CANDU fuel bundles in Canada, the materials would be worth more than $1 trillion. So we are talking about more than Canada's national debt. And we're just sitting on that, waiting for technology to move forward. Alex, I hope I addressed what you wanted me to address. There's also thorium reactors, and if you want me to come back and do an entire talk on nuclear at some point, believe me, I'm more happy about doing that than you are to listen. Because I love talking about nuclear. All right. I can't tell if there are other questions in the queue. What have you found to be the most effective ways about communicating energy issues and the least effective? Well, at the risk of alienating my hosts, I find situations in which I am talking to an audience that I can't see to be fairly ineffective because I don't feel like there's a dialogue going back and forth here. I can't tell whether or not I've addressed your concerns because I can't really hear your concerns. You're limited to maybe 50 words, which does not necessarily communicate the subtleties. Going back to the question about somebody's, Jenna, I believe her name was, saying that she was under the impression that nuclear waste harmed the environment. Well, I wasn't able to get any context, and I wasn't able to hear everything that she had to say about that. And I find this two-way street. What are you concerned about? Oh, you're concerned about the pipeline getting denied because it's going to hurt Alberta jobs. You're concerned about nuclear waste because you read this thing about Fukushima, that the fish are now radioactive, and you're concerned. So the concerns are often complicated, and in a situation where I'm just presenting a bunch of facts, which is what I'm doing, or I'm trying to do at least, I find that's fairly ineffective. What is effective is when everybody can sit around, I think, more as equals, and talk about, well, what do you really care about? Versus what do I really care about? One of the things that we talk a lot about in Alberta is, oh my God, we've got natural gas, and natural gas is less CO2, and it is. And if you talk about it from that framework, people start going, oh, well, we'll just switch to natural gas, and that's going to solve climate change. But that's completely wrong. But within the frame of that conversation, it winds up sounding really quite reasonable. So we have to frame our conversations properly, and I think we have to actually bring everybody's concerns to the table. Gordon, I hope I've answered your question. Jason Armstrong and I were talking as we were setting this up about how we might be able to turn this into more of a dialogue, because I think that would be quite helpful. I will trust that a new question will miraculously appear in front of me.
I actually have a question.
Yes, Jason.
So based on that, I do agree that I think anyone who is looking at the energy system, both and globally, will agree we want to lift people out of energy poverty, but we want to try and do so in a way that doesn't destroy the climate. Based on everything you're showing and everything I've seen, there is no easy solution. Obviously, there's no easy solution, but I wonder, do you see any solution at this point, or do you think the only way out of this is a technological fix, or is it about lifestyle changes, about reducing energy use globally, or is it something that we still haven't figured out yet? It's still elusive. This is obviously opinion, but what do you think on that?
Yeah, no, I think opinion-based conversations are really important because we actually have opinions, and I like to believe that as an expert, my opinion is valuable. But I do want to take a step back and just metacognitively point out exactly how Jason was able to unpack his entire question, as opposed to the rather succinct questions that I'm getting along the side, as a demonstration of what I had been talking about before. Okay, And I'm now getting distracted by Catherine's question in my queue. So, um, Jason, let me see if I'm correctly understanding your question. What do I see as a way forward to move people out of energy poverty and deal with climate change? Is it efficiency reduction and so forth? Jason, is that a reasonable summary of your question?
Yeah, I guess there's potentially one is reducing global energy use, which I don't know if that's happening anytime soon, or is it a technological fix that either is just around the corner or hasn't actually come about, or is it something completely different from those two options?
I would say it's something completely different from those. And the reason I would say that is first and foremost, there is no evidence whatsoever that people will wind up reducing their energy use, period. Everything about energy conservation is wonderful when you're in a wealthy country like Canada, but we're always having the wrong conversations about energy conservation anyways. We're talking about things like turning off the lights when you leave the room, which I'm not opposed to, but then we idle our cars. And idling your car for a few minutes actually uses quite a bit more energy than leaving the lights on. Likewise, just walking through your door to go outside on a cold day allows all this heat to escape. In Alberta, we use 6 times as much energy to heat our homes as we do all of our electricity use in our homes combined. Turning off the lights is a silly, changing the light bulbs from incandescent to LED. I do it myself. I'm not opposed to it, but it's these energy efficiency things are nickel and dime for. I think if we were really aggressive about energy efficiency and develop new technology, Canada might be able to reduce its per person energy use without dramatically influencing our wealth by about 30%. But when we're talking about people in Nepal burning animal dung to keep warm, there's no energy efficiency way to get them to where we are without at least doubling their energy use. And the world population is going to grow to about 10 billion people and then probably level off. It might hit 11 billion people, but the world's population is actually growing, slowing down in its growth. And I have some slides about that I can go to if people want. Jason, have I addressed your question?
I think it probably is a wider discussion. I agree. So it's still not really clear how we find that future where we have energy wealth and we have a sustainable climate policy or climate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the difficulty with things like getting people out of energy poverty, truthfully, people are just doing that. I mean, China is aggressively getting themselves out of energy poverty, and it's working. It's just killing people with the air pollution, right? Like, there was a story about a year ago of an 11-year-old boy, I think, who died of lung cancer from the pollution. I mean, they're doing it. There's costs. Okay. I want to address Catherine's question over here. Catherine, do you foresee nuclear energy in Alberta's energy future? Depends on the timeline you're talking about. The short answer is not before I retire. One of the really big problems with nuclear power, at least the way it's done today, is that if we decided we wanted nuclear power right now, it would be, and we started construction and everything, getting the EA approval, it would take 10 years before we got anything. We wouldn't get any power for 10 years. So first of all, there's that 10-year lag. Secondly, Alberta's electricity market is fundamentally different from almost every other electricity market in the world, in that we are a quasi-deregulated thing where you bid. It's complicated. I can explain it if you really care. But it basically boils down to the spot price varies dramatically, and you have no idea how much you're going to wind up getting for the electricity you produce. That kind of economics is suicide for the nuclear industry. And I don't see, Alberta's quite proud of our deregulated electricity grid. I am not a fan, but I recognize there are some good things about it, but on the whole, I actually prefer a heavily regulated market, personal preference. But I cannot conceive of Alberta getting a nuclear power plant before I retire. which is unfortunate because I was hired by the University of Calgary when Alberta was thinking about getting a nuclear power plant, and they brought me out here, and I set up my family here in the hopes that I'd, be the nuclear guy at the University of Calgary, and here I am, and here they aren't. So I'm actually a little bitter about this, Catherine. I regret to say. Okay. I don't know how to tell if there's. Oh, there is. Oh, nope, that's not what I thought it was. Okay, go back to the Q&A app.
Yeah, maybe we'll see if there's any last questions, and if not, we can wrap this up.
Well, while we're waiting for the last question to show up, I have something else I wanted to show off, which goes back to the screen share. Okay. So this is also on Energyeducation.ca. We have here a map of the world, a Mercator projection, because it makes Canada look nice and big. And here's where we get our electricity from. So fossil fuels is roughly 2/3. It's 5/6 of total energy production, but it's 2/3 of electricity, and roughly 1/6 is hydro, and roughly 1/8 is nuclear. And here's wind, here's biomass, and you actually have to go over here in order to see solar, tide, and wave. So we're talking a lot about solar. We're really not generating a lot from solar. Wind winds up being about 2%. And the nice thing about this map, and I do encourage you to go to the Energy Education website and explore this, is you can click on any country in the world. For example, let's take a look at China, because we've talked a lot about China. So you click on Asia, and then you click on China, and here is how much China gets from fossil fuels, which is mostly coal, some natural gas, fair amount from hydro. And if you click down here, you can actually change what year we're looking at. And then just click the water to zoom back out. So there's a lovely country here called Lesotho, entirely inside of South Africa. And think for a second, where do you think Lesotho gets its electricity from? And I love that my students have inevitably said, Lesotho gets its electricity from South Africa, and that is true. But Lesotho itself generates its electricity entirely from hydro. So this is a matter of electricity generation. So for example, you can actually click on North America, and here we have Canada. And the neat thing about Canada is you can actually click here to view individual provinces. So here's detailed. You can do the same thing with the US, by the way, if you want to find out what our friends south of the border are doing. And you can go through and click wherever you like. You can even click on Prince Edward Island. And I was shocked to discover that Prince Edward Island generates so much from wind. But once again, that's what they generate. They're able to do this because of really big ties with New Brunswick, which gets its electricity there, and Nova Scotia, which gets its electricity from fossil fuels. Okay, so here's Quebec, here's Ontario, here's my home province of Alberta, and I love Nunavut is all hydrocarbons. Now in the case of Nunavut, that is diesel generators for the most part. Every province in Canada has a very different energy story, and every province in Canada has a very different energy solution possible based on what it is they've got available. Scott Luft asks, you don't have hope for SMRs appearing driven by private usage such as steam for extraction and other process applications for heat? In Alberta, I regret to say that the odds of getting a small modular reactor in Canada's bitumen, which is the friendly way, or the scientifically accurate way of referring to tar sands and oil sands without getting into whether it's a tar sand or an oil sand. And my answer is no. I do not believe that SMRs will be practical for bitumen recovery. I had a student research this extensively. I understand there are some very smart people out there who disagree with me, and I encourage you to listen to them as well. But my opinion is that SMRs are not going to show up on the Alberta scene for quite a while. I would love to see SMRs. Small modular reactors are small nuclear reactors that have the capability of completely transforming the nuclear energy scene. But one thing you got to understand is that environmental activists are very adamantly opposed to tar sand development, and I see where they're coming from. I'm not arguing with them about that. And they are also adamantly opposed to nuclear power. And I also see where they're coming from on that. I disagree with them, but they do have their perspective. And the idea of mixing nuclear power with the bitumen deposits in Alberta, it's such a political hotbed. It's just not going to happen. Moreover, natural gas is cheap, and natural gas is something we have here in Alberta, so it's something we have infrastructure for. Up until we start putting a serious tax on climate change, on carbon to prevent climate change or cap emissions, I have no preference between carbon taxes and carbon caps or levies or whatever. But until we start doing that seriously, we are not going to see any dramatic shift. And I think that that's what's going to be necessary for the SMR technology. But there's so many other places I think it's going to make sense for those to go first. I just don't see it coming to Alberta, which I know is an unpopular view, but that is my opinion, Scott. Okay. I think we are coming to a close, so I'm going to turn the microphone back over to my esteemed host, Jason Armstrong. Thank you for inviting Energyeducation.ca to talk about energy in the Let's Talk Energy Week from the Museum of Science and Technology based in Ottawa.
Thanks a lot, Jason. So thank you for everyone who participated. We'll be hosting our next Google Hangout on March 26th. As I mentioned before, we've now started doing them en français as well. So if you know anyone who is a francophone, those will be happening at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The English one will be happening at 1 p.m. If you have any ideas of how we can turn these from presentations into discussions, please reach out to me. You can find my contact information on our website, letstalkenergy.ca, or if you have my email, please send me a note. Or also, if you have something you'd like to present to the group, I welcome you, encourage you to reach out to us. We want to have this more as a discussion and a conversation, and less one way. So if you have solutions, please share them with the group. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next month. Take care.